Hello everyone and welcome to Beginner's Code. Today we are going to be creating a simple one-page website using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Okay, so the first thing that I've done is I've created a directory called one page website, and inside of this directory there is another directory called images, and there are three images. One that's a footballer, one that's of people running, and one that's of a swimmer. So the next thing I'm going to do is outside of this images folder, but inside of this one page website, I'm going to create a index.html file, and then a main.css file, and also a main.js file. So now the first thing that we're going to do is with the index.html file, we're just going to create the HTML5 boilerplate. So now using Emmet, if you just tab along, it will auto-fill this out. So now we can change the title to single page website. And then we need to add the link to the main.css file. And we can also add here the source, so the script file. So here we just say main.js, and then inside of the body, which is the main bulk of our, is where the content lies, we will add a nav, and this just is a HTML5 tag that symbolizes that this is a navigation bar. And then here we can just add in 3 buttons. So I'm just going to copy and paste. And then for the button, we are going to use the data page attribute, and we are going to make this page 1. And then we will do the same for the second button and make this page 2. And the same for the third button, page 3. So now the first one will have a link to football. The second will have a link to running. And the third will say swimming. So now outside of our navbar, we will just create 3 different divs. So the first div will have an ID of page 1. The second div will have an ID of page 2. And the third div will have an ID of page 3. And now inside of these divs, we can start adding our content. So first we'll have an image, and the source will link to the images / and we'll say football. And then here we'll just have football image. And then we will have a heading 1 for football, and then just some paragraph text of lorem ipsum. Now to make that a little bit cleaner, I'm just going to separate it onto some lines. Now we will do the same for page 2, so images / running, and then we'll just add the alt text, and then we'll say heading 1 with running, and then another lorem ipsum paragraph text. And again, just to make it more visually appealing. So then finally for the third page, images, swimming, and then we're going to add swimming image, heading 1 of swimming, and then another paragraph text of lorem ipsum. And that is the base of our HTML. So now if we save this and we head over to our main.css, we can actually start styling this. So I'm just going to open with my Google Chrome. So now we have the football, running, swimming buttons with 3 different images that are all way too big and all the text. So it's all there, which is perfect. So now just to make sure that everything's linked, if we go to our main.css and we just change the heading 1 to red, and we head back to here and we refresh, we now have our heading 1s in red. So if we come back and just remove that, the first thing that we actually want to do is grab a Google font. So now if we head over to Google and just say Google Fonts, I'm going to search Roboto and just grab this one. We'll say 400, and then we'll choose the import. We'll copy this and paste the import at the very top, and then we will move on to our body tag. So our body tag will have a background color of E4DC E5, sorry about that. And then we will say the font family, which we will now grab from here. So font family, Roboto, and then the backup will be sans serif. And if we just paste that in here, now we can say display, we want to be flex, and we want to justify the content to the center and align the items to the center. And then we want to actually make the flex direction column. So now if we save that and then move on to our next tag, which will be the navbar. So if we target the actual nav, we can say display flex, justify content center, and then align dash items to the center. And we're just going to give a margin top of 60 pixels. So now if I save this and head back to our website and refresh this, we now have a background color and some buttons that have been pushed down. So now we can actually target the buttons and give them their own styling. So we'll say button, and we only need to choose the button tag because we have 3, so we'll make them all look the same. So margin will be 30 pixels by 40 pixels, and then we'll say background color of 283C53, and then we'll say the actual color of the font will be E4DC E5, and then we'll say the font family will be Roboto again, so we can just copy this and paste it to there. And then letter spacing of 0.15 and then text transform to uppercase, and we'll say padding of 15 pixels by 20 pixels. So now if we head back to Google Chrome, we have some styling for our buttons now. And we can now actually give it a little bit more effect. So we'll say border radius of 10 pixels, which gives it a nice little curve. And then we'll say border of none. And then we will say box dash shadow, and it will be 0 pixels by 5 pixels, 5 pixels, and then 0. And we will say that the actual color that we want it to use will be 283C53. And if we save this, head back to here, we now have a little glow at the bottom, and there's no actual border to them, which looks much nicer. So now if we head back to here, we can actually start targeting our images, because at the moment they are taking a massive chunk of our screen up and we can't actually see what we're doing. So now if we target the image and we just say the height is 200 pixels, and then we can also just give it a nice little shadow, just exactly the same as it is above, so they'll have a nice little glow just like the buttons. Now if we refresh this, we have our images resized with a nice little shadow at the bottom. So now if we head back to here, we can actually start styling our divs so that each div is this one section. So now if we then do div, this will target every single div that we have. So we can say the width we want to be 60%, and that will be 60% of the main body because it's the parent tag for it. We're then going to use the margin top, and we'll say 50 pixels. and background color of 9BC 0B9. And then we want to use display flex and justify content to the to the flex start. And if I save this, then I'll show you what that is. So everything's pushed to the start. If I made it to the center, it basically does the same thing. But as we make things change, the flex start will change everything. So the next thing we're going to look at is, we'll just do align items to the center, and then padding of 20 pixels, and a border radius of 15 pixels. So now if we refresh this, it actually gives it a little bit more thickness around the outside, and then we can start targeting these two as individual elements. So the next thing that we're going to do is the heading 1, and we'll say the position we want to be absolute, and we want to transform, we want to transform and then translate on both axes. So we want to say 350 pixels by -60 pixels. And if we just refresh this, we have it pushed all the way over to here. And then we want to say the color is 283C53. And then if we refresh this, it's got a little bit more of a color, but we actually want to get it pushed back to this way. So let's try and change this a little bit. So 150 pixels, and we could probably actually make this 50, and we have it a lot more closer to the center. But if we potentially make it 0, it might actually be perfect. Yeah, so now we can start using although the swimming tag down here is a lot further over. So let's just give it a little bit. We'll just say 50 just to make sure. And then we'll target the P tag. So we'll say the width here will be 50%, and that will be 50% of the div, which is already 60% of the main body. And then we'll say the color will be 6A0136, and then we will say the margin left will be 50 pixels, and we will transform on the y-axis, and this will just be 20 pixels. I'm confused as to why this is showing an error. That might be why. Putting a O instead of a 0, my bad. So now we have the transform, we can actually give a border to the top, and we'll just say 1 pixel solid, and we will give the 283C53 hex code. And then we're going to give a little padding to the top as well, just to push the border up slightly, and this will be 10 pixels. So now if we refresh this, we have a nice little border between the heading and the paragraph tag. And then now if we head back over to here, the final thing that we want to do is just create a sorry, we need to target page 2 and page 3, the divs here, because when we actually add the JavaScript, we're going to make these ones disappear on click, but when we first load the page, all 3 will load. So I'll show you what I mean by this, but if we just put in a comment saying don't display page 2 or 3, and then here we're just going to use the page 2 ID and page 3, and we will just say display none. And that means that when we first load the page, these two will not be visible. So now if we refresh this, we just have the football here. And now if we head over to our main.js, and if we just say console.log and then hello world, and if we inspect and come over to our console, you can see here we have hello world. So we know that the JavaScript is all connected, which is good. So now the first thing that we want to do is create a function, and the function will be called showPage, and it will take in a parameter of page. So now inside this function, we want to use a document.querySelector, and we want to query select all, and this will be all the divs. So we're going to target all the divs that we have on our page, and then we're going to say for each, and then in brackets div. So for every div that we have, we are going to create an arrow function, and then inside of this arrow function, we're just going to change the div style and affect the display and set it equal to none. So now if we add in underneath this a document.querySelector, we want to then target the specific page. So the page will be passed in the next section, but what we're actually going to be doing here is using backticks, and this will allow us to add in a variable, and the variable that we're adding in is this page variable, and it will affect the page that we are choosing between page 1, page 2 and page 3, depending on what button's been clicked. So here we can pass in the hashtag to symbolize the query selector, so the CSS selector for ID, and then we will use the $ symbol and then open and close parentheses, well, open and close curly brackets and pass in page. So here we should have back page 1, page 2, page 3. And then what we're going to do is just change the style.display, and we're going to set it equal to flex. So whatever one that we have clicked on, we're going to change the styles, the display of it from none to flex. So now if we save this and then come down to the next line, we can then add a event listener. And this event listener will be an event listener on the whole document. And we're going to make sure that the content has been loaded. So by DOM content loaded, it will just ensure that everything is loaded before this function will be called. So now this function that we have created, or we will create, will be binded to the event listener, and every time, well, whenever the DOM content has been loaded, this function will then happen. So inside of this function, we will say query selector all, and we are going to say button, and then for each button we're then going to use another arrow function, and then here we're just going to say the button dot on click. So this is going to check every time the button has been clicked, and we're going to set that equal to a function. So whenever the button has been clicked, we are then going to call this function, and this function will just call the show page function up here, and we will pass in this, which resembles at the moment the document as a whole, or the button as a whole for this specific function, because we are using this on the button. So this dot dataset dot page, and this is just going to access the data page that we've passed in here. So if we get, for each button, if page 2 is clicked on, it will pass in page 2 to here, and then it will pass in page 2 to this function, and we will actually change page 2 to be flex while everything else is none. So now if we save this and head over to Google Chrome and give it a refresh, now if we click on the specific buttons, you see everything changes, although we do have a little bit of styling, but this is just because this is open. So now if we close this it all works perfectly. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this has helped your understanding on how we can use JavaScript to interact with our HTML and CSS to create more stylish and visually appealing websites for our users to interact with. If you liked what we've been through and you want to learn more, please drop a like and subscribe to my channel to keep up to date. Stay tuned as I have a series that I will be dropping soon that will go from start to finish of how to build a website using Python and Django.